We all know our history. Lawyers, mostly without disabilities, fought for decades, sometimes alongside families and sometimes against families, to end institutionalization and develop a continuum of services, group homes, and other programs in the community that essentially repeated the same patterns and isolation of institutions. Rarely in those days were people with disabilities themselves at the center of strategy meetings or decision-making. Although the long history of institutionalization and community-based housing may be waning thanks to Olmsted, the role of people with disabilities at the center of decision-making still remains a challenge. Even now, I, who is not a disabled person, other lawmakers and lawyers without disabilities, are often the ones talking about person-centered programs and supported decision-making programs for people with disabilities. How can CPR now give meaning to the slogan, "Nothing about us without us"? To me, that is the challenge that lies ahead for CPR and all of us in this field. My work with the UN in drafting the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities was truly life-changing. Not only were people with disabilities there in full force, but the CRPD itself recognizes the right of all people to make decisions about their own lives and to live in the community with choices equal to others. These rights do not mean the right to live in a particular house in a particular neighborhood, but they do mean the right of all to make decisions about where to live and with whom, and how to choose the supports that they may want and need. It reminds us that none of us is truly independent at all. People with and without disabilities need each other. But how can that need be used to realize individual potential rather than merely a budget line for support services? I am not suggesting that the center focus on housing cases only or amendments to Medicaid and state funding initiatives. Rather, I am wondering if CPR's trailblazing work in the area of supported decision-making now for people with guardians can be expanded for all people with disabilities. Let me explain. Even people without guardians who are disabled remain unemployed and underemployed, do not feel welcome in universities, and are subjected to barriers in their decision-making in most every aspect of their lives. There are barriers to the careers they may choose, the decisions about where to live and with whom, because rent subsidies are limited and housing funds are in short supply, and they're told whether or not they can marry and have kids, and limited in their pursuit of the life they want for themselves. How can we expand the right to decision-making that the CRPD envisions in Article 12 and the right to live with choices equal to others that it includes in Article 19? How can these international human rights principles challenge our own U.S.-biased approach to civil rights and expand our view of what human rights means for all, including people with disabilities? Even if we here in the U.S. don't ratify the CRPD, we can learn from other countries and eradicate the distinction in our laws and policies between those with and without disabilities. I'm not suggesting that we stop using the ADA and other laws to fight discrimination. There is still much work to be done in that area. But how can we develop a broader view of what it means to be treated equally? How can we use laws to facilitate the real inclusion of people with disabilities in our communities and in our lives? To me, it is all about how we can give legal protection to the value of difference. Can we develop informal and formal systems of support and funding to enhance the lives of people with disabilities so they can realize their own dreams and the rest of us can kind of get out of the way? How can we use our legal expertise to create truly universally designed schools, workplaces, homes, and communities so that people with disabilities can move about, make choices, choose their own friends and lovers, and live their lives as people without disabilities do? How can we use our legal skills and precedents to realize the goal for each person, with or without a disability, to realize his or her own life goals? At SU, we talk a lot about going beyond compliance with the laws. Yes, we need to enforce the mandate of Olmsted and the accommodation requirements of the ADA. But how can we use legal strategies to create a world, or at least a country, or maybe even the state of Massachusetts, in which people are valued, even if they hear voices, eat with their feet, walk with a cane, use an iPad to speak, or communicate with sign language? To me, that is what the fight for disability rights all these many years has been about. We are not there yet, but I know that with CPR leading the way, we will be at least on the road to getting there. Thank you. I really love you all, and I wish I could be there, but I'm glad that I had this chance to say hello. Congratulations, CPR.
The mental disability service systems, while spending a great deal of time on creating new service options and more choices, have nevertheless left them alone to wrestle in the world of changing expectations, and in deregulating services as a reaction to the past regulatory overkill, and in increasing reliance on non-licensed services. The service systems have largely eliminated expectations that people will be reasonably protected from harm. They have delegated responsibility for monitoring back to the service providers, to managed care organizations and their case management systems, and have almost guaranteed ignorance of any problems that develop. In relying upon the generic service systems as part of a policy of normalization, they have created demands upon protective service systems, but have done little or nothing to help those systems to respond to the demands when they come, as they knew they would. The ultimate safety net, if there is one, is the police, which creates a new set of risks and, all too often, ends in tragedy. The highly visible failures that are being experienced in some places around the country are being used to push back against the efforts to close unnecessary institutional beds, as if the solution for the failures of public policy is to incarcerate its victims. My point is that as we continue to advocate for community integration, we need to maintain a sharp focus on the structural safeguards that are essential. People who have reliable support from family and friends may survive and thrive in integrated settings, while those without such supports are highly dependent upon other safeguards: the quality of paid staff, the availability of case managers, support coordinators, public guardians, protective services, monitors, regulators, and advocates. Each of these safeguards needs to be consciously built in and needs to be adequately funded. The challenge for advocates in this new world is much more complicated than it was in the past. The wretched conditions in Willowbrook, or Penhurst, or Northampton could galvanize even the most stone-hearted person and join in efforts to reform. Now the risks are more subtle, more hidden, less obvious, and they are sometimes concealed by words like equality, autonomy, integration, and choice. There is no custodian to hold responsible when something goes wrong. Harm, when it occurs, is often the product of decisions of the individual himself. Advocates, and by advocates I am not talking only about attorneys and paid advocates, but also family members and engaged professionals. Advocates need to be sufficiently trained and equipped to have a heightened awareness of the risks in this changing environment and to build substantial and robust safeguards that are reasonably designed to protect people from foreseeable harm. I know that CPR has people of intelligence, experience, and discernment who are equal to this task, and I wish you well on the next 40 years. Thank you.
One of the avenues that I think is really important for an organization like CPR to focus on in the future is really in getting the deep penetration of principles of disability rights and civil rights into these areas of state government and areas of practice that people don't see, right? So I think, that the hospitals were obviously a big place that the public could focus on. Encouraging community living was something that again creates something very obvious that people can focus on. Employment issues, which the center's been working on, again, you can see see sheltered workshops, you can see people working in the supermarket, and that's something people can see. But there are places that nobody goes. I mean, places like child custody courts or probate courts where people lose guardianship or have guardianship imposed on them, right? Where we see very little penetration of disability rights principles, and we're finding that it's actually decisions made in places like that that are making it hard to achieve the goals of the big litigation that CPR engages in. And so I think focusing on how to get the penetration of civil rights principles into those areas that are sort of the nooks and crannies, but are so important for making rights real, that's a real area that should be a future focus.
Good evening. I'm Kurt Decker, the Executive Director of the National Disability Rights Network, the Association of the Protection and Advocacy Programs throughout our country. I'm sorry I can't be with you tonight to celebrate the 40-year history of CPR. I've known CPR and worked with them since the mid-'80s, working with people with mental illness. When they first started out in the institutions, trying to close those places and making sure that people with mental illness could live a life in the community. It's been exciting over these decades to watch CPR move from representing just people with mental illness to expand to the full range of people with disabilities, including people with intellectual disabilities, traumatic brain injury, people in nursing homes, and the like. It's also been exciting to see them move into other arenas of disability policies, such as employment and community integration. And their recent victories on sheltered workshops and in nursing homes is a clear indication of the breadth of their work over these many, many years. I'm looking forward to working with CPR in the future. I'm very excited about their new project on supported decision-making, one of the most cutting-edge areas in the disability policy arena. I know that CPR and NDRN, as well as our colleagues, know that passing statutes and bringing lawsuits is not the end of the journey. We all have to be vigilant to make sure that the promise of the laws and lawsuits for people with disabilities are really impacting on their daily lives and bringing them into the mainstream of society. I look forward to working with CPR in the future years to come.